What is up? We have a new look going on. So these are just things that occur. I can't say anything about them. So what there is for us to discuss today is what I'm calling the state question. So why don't we just begin? So people will be like, well, luckily there's Wikipedia, right? We got Leviathan. My copy's in the bathroom. But okay, there's no academic consensus on the definition of the state. How about that, right? That's what source we got over here. Well, could worth, whatever, that doesn't mean anything to me. But so that's really all you need to know. Like, I mean, then people will say, well, just because people don't agree on the definition doesn't mean that something doesn't exist. Of course, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Fundamentally, as I said, we're talking about the state question. So, I mean, if you're thinking of the blank question, there's really no on it. We might as well just bring up the Jewish question, right? This is one of the national, similar to other national questions, right? So, the question is, it's basically, why call it a question, right? Why is that? It's the question of what is going to happen in a specific scenario. And so the way it gets labeled will have to do with like what these nations are is like, well, there's groups of people. So they kind of see themselves as similar. So like they're going to coordinate possibly at some point. Things might come to a head. What's going to happen, right? With the interplay. Of course, things like this are a national question is for me, one of the things that I would see was limited about it is that, if you just call it like, for example, the Armenian question or the Cyprus question, it makes it sound like what is uncertain is localized to Cyprus or Croatia or Bessarabia, whatever it is you're talking about, Bessarabia. Anyway, the point is like the reason why there's a question is because of interplay. That's where I would bring in, right, uneven and combined development. So see, like I will sit there and talk, doo-doo about Marxism, basically, and Marxism is inadequate. But for me, uneven and combined development is basically the jewel in the conceptual crown of Marxism. Like Marxism, it's sort of like somebody wrote this, Baudrillard's theory of value. I can't pull this whole thing up, but basically a baby in the Marxist bathwater, it's like, yeah, maybe it probably has something also to do with uneven and combined development. Like it's very cool. There's also a specific article which is something like this, Anarchy in the Mirror. Yeah, I also don't know if I can pull this up, but I have read this before. I think I have posted it to archive.org, but I can't remember what account is on or whatever. But anyway, this article, Anarchy in the Mirror of Uneven and Combined Development, this person is basically mobilizing uneven combined development. So there's a rich discourse on this beyond Trotsky, because Trotsky basically was just like shooting from like half court and like sketched out an idea. And then people were like, wait a minute, this is like the best idea ever. And so, I mean, for me, this would be related to the co-origination, right? So we have here Prata dependent arising, and I mean, immediately I'm already on Nekantivada. I feel like I'm like getting close. Anekantivada, yeah. It's also related to this many-sidedness thing. So it's like what I'm saying is uneven combined development in this is basically interestingly using the theory of an uneven and combined development to address the question of like, well, where does the distinction between a domestic and foreign sphere come from? And the answer is like it's basically super complex, but it's not. It's specifically not that there's a domestic part, and then it discovers that it is in. It's like no, there is always fundamentally similar to us as living beings. It doesn't make sense for us to exist by ourselves because in order for us to survive, there must be other kinds of us, right? It's hard to say because okay, now there's something called the species question. It can also be called something else, which is very awkward for my attempt to draw a poetic parallel between these question things. But like there's the species problem. But basically on the Wikipedia page about species, there's something about this. The species problem. Okay. Well, okay, so it's not fucking the species question. Okay, I'm sorry. That's just wishful thinking on my part. But the species problem is basically how to define a species. It is difficult to define a species in a way that applies to all organisms. The debate about species concepts is called the species problem. Entirely vague distinction between species and varieties, right? No one definition has satisfied all naturalists, yet every naturalist knows vaguely what he means when he speaks of a species. Generally, the term includes the unknown element of a distinct act of creation, whatever that means. Anyway, the thing is, like, what are you saying here? Like, there are similarly to what to say, the way there's a domestic, like a tribe, right? A tribe will never just be like, oh, we're just by ourselves, but oh wow, now we discovered there are other tribes. Every tribe already knows that there's other people, right? They've been knowing that, even if it wasn't the same ones who knew it. A child comes up, but like other people are telling you, and you're experiencing that there are, other people. You're never, but that's corollary to how we as individuals, like, even if like we live in isolated existence, it's still socialized in the sense that like none of our lives make sense without the context of all the other lives that are being lived around us. Like you can go in and like, oh, I do value, right? Okay. But like we're always a part of a system. Like it doesn't, what we do by ourselves doesn't make a lot of sense. There is like the Robinson Crusoe basically idea, but like that is right, like not basically not relevant to discussing social life, which is so much of what there is. Anyway, so what's the point here? Basically, it's uneven combined development. I would also, again, you're taking uneven combined development, you're applying it to, you have systems of systems. So, I mean, that's where, you're talking about systems destruction warfare. But like the core idea here is that like a military or whatever, is a system of systems, or it's systems of systems of systems, right? That's also where I create my corollary. I should create its own video maybe, but it's the emergency of emergencies. So the point is, like, the same way there are nested systems of systems, there are emergencies in all the systems. The same way you'd say there's a rabble in all the classes. Yeah, that's a subset. That's a strict subset of like, it's a symptom of the fact that there is an emergency in every, you'd say in every state, right? The only state there is the state of emergency, right? Would basically be the supposition. But anyway, you got your systems, but then you can also talk about, psychological systems. And then you're already also talking about organ systems in the body, because the body is itself a system of systems, right? And it's very helpful. This is very convenient, unlike the Jewish, or the, sorry, LOL, that is symptomatic. But, like the species problem versus the species question, the whole thing is mother fricking, there are these systems. It's very convenient for me to say that the body's a system of systems, because obviously the body is a system in the sense it is the drawing together of all of these other systems. Like there's a lot here, actually. There's even more than I thought. Let's just read them out for the sake of thank you. Like respiratory, digestive and excretory, circulatory, urinary, integumentary, okay, exterior protection of body and thermal regulation, okay, skeletal, muscular, endocrine, okay, hormones, okay, exocrine, okay, lymphatic, nervous, reproductive. Like that's a lot of systems, okay, and even okay, but then the nervous system, where do we come down here, right? The brain, right? The thing is, the brain is also its own system of systems, right? And then there's that whole thing where like the brain is most complicated object of all time. This is fucking mind blowing. Like the most complicated object in the universe, and that's just one of us. And then a social system of systems is like the networking together of the most complicated shit ever, right? So this needs to be very much, you could say, sacralized. Like you need to basically be like, this shit is a big deal. Like don't sit here and take it for granted, right? That we can just talk to each other and all of a sudden like things are changing, right? And it's all like, oh, don't be grandiose, don't be delusional. Who knows what's, it's like, yeah, absolutely. But like, also do not over this line, you do not know, like do not like sell yourself short. Like you are so powerful, like, and we know this because like usually when we operate like with our power or whatever, people get upset, right? And we get hit, right? We are coercively punished, right? We are, and So think about what that is, right? You are basically inflicted with stimuli which are designed to put your brain in a state of like agitation, where it's like you're being shamed, right? Like people are basically like, oh no, say that, right? Like we don't say that politically, or like no, you don't get it, you don't have the right skin color to say that. Like who are you to whatever? And then it's like obviously there's different ways in which that happens to different kinds of people, and then for any given one of us, like we would think that sometimes maybe are correct and some people are sometimes are not, right? Or at least the situation is different depending on the scenario, like who, not necessarily who deserves it, but like where is it more or less understandable or something of this nature. But like the issue is like I mean, we can't see past it. Forget where I was kind of going with that. But anyway, you got your system of systems going. And so the state question is basically, what is the state, right? And so, like, there is no academic consensus. Theories of state function, theories for the emergence of the state. I mean, is this relevant? Sort of, because, like, what is the state? The state is the perception, in a way, of the state. Like, if it's a network function, like, what is it? It's a network effect, I believe. It's basically where it's like, oh, everybody uses Microsoft already, so, like, we'll use Microsoft. Or even especially between Microsoft and Apple or whatever, it's like there's no reason to use anything else, or in many cases, because it's like so many things use this. So we are now interfacing with a lot of things. But so like the state is basically the same thing. Like the state, I mean, it's similar really to the nation, right? Are we also doing this? This is the national question. All there is a national question. Because in the sense of like, what is a nation? You know, you read motherfucking Imagine Communities, right? That's what this is about, right? What is a nation? And how slippery this is, right? That this is actually a big issue if you were actually trying to think about it. And that is, yeah, that's symptomatic. That's something to be looking at. And so even as much as, you know, right now, you know, the thing that's going on right now is, you know, there's a certain form of nationalism which is ascendant, right? So very much the context for this is, you know, what's going on with Donald Trump, and, you know, Donald Trump's going to become like, my grandparents were in Nazi Germany, right? Like my grandparents were raised, they were in the fucking Hitler Youth and shit, yo. So like, I'm thinking about 1933, right? Because then that's where, you know, with the state question, you know, we're taking a walk on the wild side, right? Like I just was reading some of this. And like basically my issue with Agamben's not cynical enough, right? Like that's the issue. Like, it's like the vibe that I'm trying to give off is like, okay, yeah, let's talk about Agamben. Let's talk about Hobbes. Let's talk about Carl Schmitt, right? Much to the, you know, the Nazi question, right? Yeah, like let's talk about these people. My stance toward these people is they're all basically naive and like they're soft, right? Like they're, I don't know. Like, okay, so why would I say this? Hobbes believes that, you know, the state puts an end to the state of nature, so that people are basically like competing with each other. But then when there's a sovereign, and I'm going to need some freaking water. Okay. When there's a sovereign, God, the sovereign can basically make people stop fighting with each other. And I think that that is basically delusional, right? It is not that there is a sovereign authority which then can like stop distrust dynamics. What there is the management of distrust dynamics through the supposed simplification of social structures, through this fantasy of a formal process by which decisions will be made. So this idea that there is a formal process basically allows for the creation of a legitimacy, which is always false. Like legitimate, especially at a certain point of complexity, what people believe to be happening cannot be what is actually happening. In the sense that, like, the official way decisions are made is different than the real way decisions are made. And this is not because, you know, the CIA killed John F. Kennedy. This is not because, you know, the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. Like, whatever you think is like an establishment of tyranny or whatever, it's like, sure, like, I'm not here to, like, you know, rain on your parade of, like, whatever your, you know, pet thing was. But what I'm saying is that this is fucking endemic. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, that's where, you know, I have to have some intellectual humility, just because, like, shit is a secret, yo. Like, I don't really know what's going on. Not even just, like, a secret. Again, in terms of, like, you know, like, the CIA is not releasing the JFK documents or whatever. You know, it's not like, oh, there's whole parts of science that like nobody's allowed to know about because like they only use it in Area 51 or whatever. Like I think that could be possible, but I don't sit here like worried about that. It's also I think a cosmological question. It also gets into skepticism. I mean, skepticism is always relevant. Like it feels off topic here, but like in my opinion, I'll just keep saying this and keep pounding the table for gosh darn skepticism, because in my opinion, skepticism is the unquestioned like ruler, undisputed heavyweight champion. Like skepticism is like, you know, just chilling in like the green room, like waiting for somebody to show. It's like, is there no one else type of energy is the like what skepticism is providing, like in my opinion. So like for me, the skeptical tradition runs through again, Pyrrho. I was just like getting like I'm just writing about this. I talked about this in a recent video. But you know, Pyrrho is broken. Like, yeah, like I don't know. I mean, it's not even just to say like Pyrrho invented it. Pyrrho's so great. I don't know who invented it. The thing was, he did travel with Alexander to India, what is now called India, Bharat, or whatever you might want to say. And it could be that some of the philosophers or whatever you want to call them that like were there were Jains. So it could be that Pyrrhonism or Pyrrho and Jainism are like verwandt, you know, like they are verborgen, like they are freaking like interwoven. I mean, everything is, but you know, it's just very exciting to me personally. But anyway, skepticism with regard to the state that's obviously what's happening. Like my official position, right, is state nihilism, like in the sense of a limited form of nihilism, like which is not even like nihilism. It's like mereological nihilism. It's always the one that I think of. It has its own Wikipedia page, right? So there are no objects with proper parts. So objects with proper parts are whatever is what mereological means or whatever. It's like having to do with parts. And so the nihilism part is just saying like this doesn't exist. So it's not saying like, oh my God, I'm a nihilist. I mean, if you really want to get into it, the problem is nihilism as such is like, it's really similar to the gesture I'm making toward Carl Schmitt and all this. It's like Carl Schmitt is naive, right? Like it's funny, obviously, in a way, you know, Carl Schmitt is part of Atrocities and it's very grave and I can't do it justice. That's part of why I'm not even trying really to adopt totally sober, grave persona with respect to my address to you on this topic. But you know, I think it is actually very important to basically have the stance when it comes to somebody, again, like Hobbes or, you know, state of exception. I'm trying to talk about, you know, Giorgio Agamben. Gosh darn. Right, state of exception. This is actually what I wanted to try to show you. But Agamben, right? And so Agamben is now controversial because Agamben was talking about COVID-19 as though like COVID-19 was like engineered to be a, you know, state of emergency and that this was now being utilized by, you know, the powers that be, whoever that is, right? And so like then people you know, people thought were kind of weirded out by that. Okay, and then Thomas Hobbes, right? I mean, Thomas Hobbes is considered what, a conservative, I guess, or a liberal, conservative and a liberal at the same time. I don't fucking know. But like certainly severe, I don't know, people don't really like that guy. And in terms of the war of each against all, I feel like people are not normally like attacking Hobbes for being too, or like not cynical enough. People are normally think Hobbes, it's sort of like Machiavelli. Machiavelli is also certainly, I mean, this is sort of the realist school. You know, these are like then, you know, you can also just start to bring in guys like Clausewitz, right? Like literal, like just military, right? Like that's also in this wheelhouse. But Carl Schmitt is basically doing lawfare, right? Is like that's how that works. So, but lawfare is endemic to military because, like, in order to set up a military, you have to have protocols, right? You have to have. It's more than just like we kill people good, right? You have to maintain buy-in. You have to maintain like a plausible sense that you are going after goals. You have to maintain a basic fluency or like capacity to like bring people in, organize them, like basically you could say provide wraparound services. Like if you're going to run a country, like, a country is basically providing in a sense wraparound services. Obviously they don't have to be complete, like people don't actually need healthcare, they can just die. Like it's sad, but you know, like you can run a country and just like let, you know, it's anyway. Point is, but at a certain point you have to do what's called, you know, the reproduction of whatever social life. It's not actually reproduction. I would it's another form of nihilism. I would have like reproductive nihilism, like, but that's just going back to Heraclitus, who is, I don't know, Heraclitus. Does Heraclitus talk about war? I think so. I think Heraclitus actually says war. Yeah, Heraclitus is the wait. Is he says strife is justice? Yeah, yeah, right. Heraclitus is strife is justice, man. That is also very important, right? Misfreshment is melancholia, arrogant, depressed. Okay, sad times at Ridgemont High for sure. But this is also related to the whole idea. And this is also survival of the fittest, or no, what is it called? It's called social Darwinism. Like if you want to look at Nazism, right? Like we can certainly talk about Nazism. This is in the wheelhouse, right? It's supposed to be very cynical. Like we are just looking out for number one, which is like our nation. And whatever we got to do, we're going to tell a story where we're the best and whatever. And, we're just going to, oh, I'm sorry. Did you have things like, were you alive? Did you enjoy that? Sorry, here we come, right? Very bad. But this is like part of it. Fuck, what was I saying this? It's related, right? Because here we have justice is strife. And here, the idea here is that we are just competing. And whatever wins the all-out competition, right? That is good, right? And so it is, the path beyond good and evil or whatever. And you can see this, right? I mean, it is mirrored. And, I don't mean to be drawing any unflattering comparisons to my own ancestors, right? But, in terms of, gosh darn, I'm forgetting exactly what I'm saying. Oh, dear. I forget. Well, I mean, I thought of a different example. I was going to basically draw an example from Israel. People say things like, well, the Palestinians lost a war. When you lose a war, you lose territory. Sorry. It's like, that's basically social Darwinism. Like, you're basically saying you got out-competed. Like, you lost on the battlefield. But now we live in a time where, now we don't want that, right? Now the borders are inviolable. If not, they can only move outwards. Palestine's borders are not inviolable, right? But Israel's are supposed to. Anyway, I'm not here to bang the drum about that. The point is just like to actually get into, how did we get into Eris? That's odd. But the point was Mafrik and this. Because Heraclitus is not being problematic. Like Heraclitus is not just saying like, we just got to beat the bad people. And that's what it means that strife is justice. Like that's very, this is a very profound, like, this is like very, I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm just trying to underline, like strife is justice is like, it's almost to the level of like it's like a Neo 10 commandment, or like, it's just like very, very good. And he also has war is the father of all things, but strife is not just war. I would be very interested actually in the translation and like how the connotations that people would attach to the words that Heraclitus is using for, well, obviously also justice, but strife and war. Because of course it's making me think, right, of like greater jihad. And that's that's related to the question of why I say, yeah, like Carl Schmitt's naive. Like Carl Schmitt, there's a whole bunch of shit that Carl Schmitt doesn't even question, where I'm like, bro, you just bought a bill of goods. I should be able to say better, but it's like, I don't know, like the idea that there is a nation, like that the idea that there is like a national interest, or like that somebody's going to decide that, or that they can be trusted to do so. And like, yeah, I mean, it basically seems to me that we convince ourselves that something is true about our social organization just because we can make a pageant of it, and people can be made in a way to recognize that pageant or aspects of it and then conform in our behavior. So it's basically like we are part of the pageant. But that doesn't mean that we're actually internalizing some sort of core logic that is making that happen, such that like that sense of normalcy can be disrupted at any time, because we actually retain sovereignty as persons. But it is necessarily also complex, because in a way the distinction between persons breaks down as with all discrete objects, back to beyond the pale, so on and so forth. And that's another place where, people like this are naive, like this, or, Carl Schmitt, or sorry, Karl like Clausewitz, where it's like you were talking about the will, right? Oh, it's a contest of wills. And it's like, yeah, but the will is not that simple. Like, it's not that simple. Like, oh, I just want what I want. Like, this is like what you want is bound up with your conception, basically your social paradigm. Like, what you even think to be a goal, like, would have to do with what you believe to be what you believe exists, what you think your situation is, like, and what you think is attainable for you and what you're capable of. But all of those things, like, you could be mistaken, right? Like, we could learn new things about the world. We could realize that, like, we have the capacities we didn't understand. We could learn that about other people that we know. That other people are like different than we thought, right? We can learn their secrets, or we can learn that they have new talents, things of that nature. And then I forgot what the other one is. Like, we can learn about new implications of things that we already thought we understood. And we can continually learn, like, that there's fucking mystery and, shit of this nature. And deeply come to question, not because, there's some fucking propaganda campaign, right, where, Russia is, trying to make me distrust the United States government, right? It's like, that's not why I distrust the United States government. Like, I'm not here to say I'm not susceptible to propaganda. The point is, like, there's a different way of it's not being distrustful, it's being skeptical. It's having a healthy skepticism with respect to these concepts, because we are dealing here with universals. It's hard to even get people to understand, like, the state is a universal, right? It's an abstract category. People will be like, no, it's not an abstract category. Well, first of all, like, I think more things are abstract categories than you're allowing for. Like, especially anything we can talk about, like, in order to talk about it, what we're using to talk about it is the abstract category of that thing. So that's already presuming a level of representation of language that I wouldn't necessarily go along with. But anyway, the state is universal, but it's sort of like, we want to believe that it exists. Oh no, there is. And then it's really the nation state, right? It's the nation state. But then, it's the national question, and that's already been a thing, right? So there's the national question in terms of, these things are about the national question in general, right? It's been a thing in Marxism, right? How do you deal with, like, having this, right? And so, but so there's not actually nations, right? The thing is, though, that there are people who are convinced that there are, and that becomes important, right? They have their own little, like, traditions and, like, ways they think that they are together, and so on and so forth. But there's also constantly nation building going on. So this sense of people being together, that's also something that you're cultivating, and that's something that we're continually. So, like, one thing that I like to say is, like, talk about the space race, like the race to come. Like, I'm not concerned with, like, oh, I'm sorry, are we preserving whatever? It's like, I don't care. We're founding. I'm not upholding whatever. I'm Abraham, right? We are all Abraham in that sense. Like, we can all be founders of discursivity. We can all be the founders of our new lineages, especially, and this is getting to utopian things or whatever, but it's like, as we're not going to need other people, right, to, like, reproduce or, like, rely on in order to, like, even use our genetic material, for example. So anyway, like, I forget where I was going with that. But yeah, really how we're all Abraham, right? Imagine, like, you can make your own people. You can create languages. I guess it's sort of like Mormonism, where you're becoming God or whatever. I don't know. Whatever, right? That's what Homo Deus is all about, though, right? Like, literally, this sort of thing is now becoming possible. But so that's where I'm saying that, in contradistinction to something like the national question, like, the nation and the state are dissolving. It's really more like, zooming in, it's like the personal question, because the problem is that more and more, then, like, the individual is also going to dissolve. Like, there is no avoiding that. Like, everything goes, right? Everything flows. It's in motherfucking right here, guy, dude, bro, Heraclitus. It's also in, Chicago, by gosh darn, my freaking feel the Illinois person, Sufjan Stevens, right? Everything flows, right? So everything's going to go, right? And so, even obviously, as individuals, we know that in the sense of personal disillusion, aka death. That's part of the reason why we want to have a nation in the first place, right? That we're invested in what is that life will continue on without us. And I think, what is it we have? Symbolic immortality, Robert J. Lifton, right? something of this nature. Yeah, see, Robert J. Lifton's symbolic immortality construct. Oh, do I only get the... Yeah, but this proves to you that I know what I'm talking about. AKA, that's not true at all. Anyway, but this proves to you that there's something. Anyway, so... Oh, and it's also related to attachment style. That's so fucking relevant. Okay, now I'm going to, like, just shift. I want this to end. But now we're at the end of the thing. The state question is actually all about attachment style. Even though attachment style is totally, like, limited as a concept. Like, it's not good enough. Like, so don't get too attached to the idea of attachment style. Especially because, dude, hello, like one of my whole concepts is called conceptual churn, which means we are not staying attached, right? We are never, it's not quite like we are not getting back together vibes, because it's like you can basically, it's sort of like a, is it a rondo? No. Is that what it is? It's like A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, F, like in styles of music. You don't have to necessarily come back to the same thing all the time, but that is basically, that is very like samsara cycle vibes. It's like you come back to the same thing after you do literally everything else. But in that sense, you can look at everything as a circuit. Anything could be the beginning or end point, and that colors, that puts a framing around everything else. And so that is, in a way, the magic of the symbolic power of each moment and each person, because like every moment of experience, in a way, could be seen as the beginning and end of time, even. And so like every gesture that we do, we're creating the world, we're destroying the world. Like this is the implications of all these things. And so when it comes to, like, sorry to like smash cut into that, but, you know, we're talking about nations. We're talking about like when people like kill each other, right? It's like why Palestinians are dying. It's like why people all over are dying, right? So why people are like being starved, and, you know, all this, you know, people are trying to like, oh, I'm going to get mine, and I'm going to protect me, and I'm going to protect the people that I give a shit about, and other people, lots of luck, gentlemen, while I, like, at best am indifferent to you, and at worst, like, I actively am trying to destroy you, basically playing a version of, you know, the most dangerous game on a planetary scale. And my rejoinder, you know, my freaking warning, like, I'm the guy at the gas station, you're driving into the woods, Mr. Plutocrat, Mr. Gosh darn, you know, whatever, fifth generation actual warfare person. It's like, what am I trying to say? You're also initiating, you are participating in what amounts to a cosmological battle royale. And like, we can basically either fight to the death, like, yeah, you can try and kill your way to security, but somebody's going to one day want to kill you. Probably you're trying to say like, oh yeah, they already want to kill me, that's why I want to kill them. It's like, yeah, but this logic is just going to make it to where nobody can trust each other. Therefore, like, more and more, everybody will want everybody else to be dead. Like, and so like, this is very, we're reframing extermination politics as like, it's beyond, it is actually existentially beyond the question of like, oh, people are bad, right? And like, oh, they're evil, right? Uh-oh, are they right wing? Like, I don't care. That doesn't mean anything to me. And like, oh, I'm sorry, is like Giorgio Agamben not a nice person, or is Thomas Hobbes not? I'm sorry, is this Eurocentric? And it's like, yeah, probably. But the question is really like, what is going to work, and what is like, you must grapple with like the, like, I mean, what to say? It's a mystery to me, right? And to everyone, right? Because we don't know what the exact, you know, determinants of the conflict are, but you've got to take it seriously at a first order level. And it's not at the level of the state, right? So like, fundamentally, like, what there is, as I've said before, like, there's like people who build and operate machines that like sustain life and create stuff and kill everybody. And more these machines are getting more generalized to where you could build nano machines that could rearrange matter to do whatever you want, type of shit. Like, it would appear that could be on the horizon, right? And at that point, things happen. Like, you don't need anybody else to survive anymore. You don't need a division of labor, because you can just type, you know, one person can just do everything. And so at that point, the other thing is, you know, what do you want other people around for? And at that level, that's where you're like, oh, how's the social fabric doing? Do people enjoy each other's company? Spoiler alert, no! People do not enjoy each other's company. Like, not only is it, oh no, political differences, it's like, think about the domestic situations. Like, abuse and neglect are normal. Like, they are just the normal state of affairs. Like, and quotation marks around everything, right? But like, everybody is neglected and abused, right? And that's where it's like, it's not even like, that's where people will be like, oh, you know, it's the capitalist patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, sure, absolutely. But like, let's be clear. Let me be clear, right? Like that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been abused, right? They've been neglected. Maybe that's where we're always thinking like, oh, these people are all fucking child rapists. Many of them were probably raped as children, right? And we're like, it's ridiculous. Like, who the age knows, right? People like might still get raped. Like, anyway, it's really just to say, like, yes, you get into the state, you get into fucking weird shit, like at the highest, whatever. But that's always, it's going on everywhere. And the thing is, going back to attachment style, as I'm trying to wind up with that, is like, it really is about social networks, right? Social network analysis or whatever, right? Like, it's about this. And social network design, construction, fluid, like participation, like being a good node in a social network. And that would involve things like being, so like I exhort, you know, I talk shit, right, about the Atlanta Police Department or whatever, like about their trustworthiness. Like, I don't want to have trust in a system that's not fucking trustworthy. So don't sit here and tell me that your goal is to be trusted when, like, I don't think, why would, if people trusted you, it would be a mistake, right? It would be like the goddamn thing with the Goldman Sachs, like, not just Goldman Sachs, but, you know, like, oh, we don't have a fiduciary, you know, responsibility to you, or like Sean Hannity or whatever being like, oh, I'm sorry, this is entertainment. Okay, if you believe me, basically, you're stupid. And like, it's unreasonable for me to be responsible for misleading you, because if you believe what I have to say, then like, you are yourself unreasonable or something. Anyway, so I forget where I was going with that. But it's basically like this thing, yeah, to be tricked. So oftentimes, and this is basically what Jesus is on about in a way, like the whole thing with religions telling us to be good is basically like, you know, there's always a balance where it's like you're doing what's right for you and you're not communicating about it. So like, let's say just like a little thing, like you want to fart and you don't want anybody to smell it. So you go outside and you fart and you come back in and you don't tell anybody. And like, you know, that's something you did for yourself. And like, you're keeping a secret, right? And it's like, does that matter? Like, no. Basically, like, that's fine. But like, that's a sliding scale up to like, we killed John F. Kennedy and now nobody can find out, you know, like, it's a sliding scale up to like, the baby's not really yours, right? Or like, you're adopted, right? Like, these kinds of things, like, you're fired, right? Like, the kinds of things, you know, the missiles are in the air, you know, the kinds of things that you find out and you're kind of shitting your pants about, right? Anyway, I forget where I got off on that. But the thing is, social. Okay, then there are two final things. Again, it's about attachment style, because basically we need to be bonded, right? To be bonded, you need to be securely attached. And it's not even just like we need to have long-term relationships to raise children or whatever. We need shit that can go into the deep future, right? We need the kind of stability we ain't never had before. And so that means we got to do shit we never did before, which means we're not just going to like go back and be like, oh, let's just do Americanism again. And like, you know, oh yeah, fucking Ben Franklin and whatever, all the same old tired bullshit. No, like, you can do whatever you want, right? You can, in terms of absolute exploit, gets back to what I was saying before. You can start wherever you want. So like, I've said this before about like motherfucking my rant 4 a.m. It's now lost to time, but it's like, you know, if you want to play the United States of America, like, go for it. Play the United States of America. But like, it really has to start to encompass everything. And I think being more forward about, you know, the way in which you are aggressively subsuming all other narrative complexes into your own, like, that needs to be thoroughly established, because it's basically letting everybody know you are laying claim, like, no one else's sovereignty, like, is going to deter you, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, like, do you have the power to kill me if I piss you off? Like, wow, good for you. Like, fine, that's not my concern. That's not my affair, right? I've read Epictetus. I don't want to live forever. I'm here for the fucking dance. And like, what I think is fucking hilarious is like helping us do the fucking, you know, great filter scenario in the most fucking engaging and, you know, entertaining for me way possible. And like, if other people don't want to watch my YouTube videos, that's like, you know, it's not my problem. Anyway, I forget where I was going with that. But basically, we're doing total defense. And, you know, there's also a thing called civic defense, right? Or civil defense. So, because the other thing is, what do we have over here? Because it says over here, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Okay? But so what is a militia, right? I guarantee you militias would be employed for like basically emergency response. Like shit. You know? So it's like, yeah, you don't think about it as a military organization. Because as soon as you're defining what you're doing as military, you're just assuming there's always going to be an enemy when like the true enemy is war itself, right? As we learned from Crimson Tide. This is also in the rant 4 a.m. I'm sorry. Did I watch Crimson Tide a few many times? I'm sorry. I watched, well, how did I get like this? I watched Crimson Tide one too many times. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I thought it would be okay. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Point is, like, the state question. I really am on topic here. Like, the state question is like the whole idea there's supposed to be an abstract concept called the state somewhere else, which is a coherent group of people that like is making like key decisions. The thing is, everybody's making key decisions. And so everybody has sovereignty. And the democracy is kind of a psyop because it's trying to capture this idea through voting. It's all like we think, right, the representative represents us, right? The congressperson represents us. But the real representation is the representation of all of our willpower and decisions and whatever, our energy is represented by the vote. And so that is supposed to be like, that's the way we influence our government. No, everything that we do is a vote. Everything we do is a choice. Everything that we do is helping to decide the nature of reality because everything that we do is influential. And that is something that has to be laid up because it is dissimulated. People are told that they are not important, not because they are not important, but because it is considered important for some other people, for other people to think that they're not important so that they won't act, you know, so anyway, so it'll influence their behavior. But that having that influence is important to the people who are telling others that they are not important, right? So that's why it's like a mind fuck, right? Anyway. So the point is people, I'm just one person. What can I do? It's like you can use your voice. And like the thing is you have to assume risk. That's the problem, right? You assume risk. That's why what I'm basically saying is back to, you know, smash cut back to fucking Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You want me on that wall, you need me on that wall, right? And it's like, well, maybe for now, Jack Nicholson, but like that's not sustainable. It is not sustainable for there to be like so much specialization. Eventually, everybody will be interchangeable in our security roles, which basically means that like everybody needs to be part of security. But this bleeds into things even like mutual aid, you know, provision of aid, like and peer support, right? Like, and then because these are all emergencies, like needing to eat is an emergency. If you don't have food, that's an emergency for you. If like you don't have sanitation, that's an emergency. If you have if you are sick and you don't have healthcare, that's an emergency, right? These are all forms of emergency response. And like in terms of civil defense, in terms of then the issue, right, is so much like it's a conceptual emergency, right? Because how do you package this in a way that you're basically motivating everybody to like volunteer? They're not drafted. They're being volunteering to basically join a civic total defense initiative, which is non-national, right? It is not limited, right? Like the commitment that we need to make is not just to people like us or people of our country, because that won't work. It's similar to like if you just wanted to be loyal to your family, but you were willing to screw over other people in your country, that's going to wind up being bad for your country. And obviously that's also what's already going on. But so that's why the big thing is not like the logistics. The big thing is the imaginational question, the limitation in our imagination and our attachments. And so that's where, you know, you're doing a play where you are, you know, giving people a little bit of what is familiar And then you are also, building in, this is where quality of intention is big, because it's like, what else are you doing? Like, like you're, here's what you expected, here's what you like, right? Here's Budweiser, here's American flag, here's bald eagle, right? Here's whatever. And then, like, it's like you're doing Project Interreliance, right? Here's subtle DEI shit, right? But so it's like, what is the quality of intention, right? Like, what is the point? Is the point that it's like, oh, we can have America, and here's a white woman with a black man, and like, that's going to be okay, like, don't worry about it, and then people don't like that or something, I don't know. But it's like, what is the point? Like, what is the point? Like, we can get along so we can do what? Right? Like, what's the positive vision here? Like, beyond just like, we don't hate or whatever. It's like, okay, well, what do we love? What does our love look like anyway? But that's the key point, because you're basically mixing in the familiar with the unfamiliar, because it's not even manipulation or something, because people want new things. That's where, like, my ideal would be, like, we help each other by, like, the ideal way for society to work would be like, you basically ascertain from people what do they want, like, in their more sober moments, where it's like, because sometimes you're like, oh, I'm drinking, I don't want to do anything, ha 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 ha. But then sometimes you're just like hungover or whatever, you're thinking about it, you're like, dang, I really should go back to school, and then that's the moment where there should be somebody to be like, okay, oh, you have like an idea, let's do it, right? And at that point, even before that, it's not like we just like let you die, but it's like, once you have an idea of what you want to do, or like with a little kid, right? Oh, they like baseball. Okay, like, let's show them baseball statistics. Let's start doing math based on baseball statistics. Let's show them art. Let's like start doing drawings. Like, let's learn about social justice through the story of Jackie Robinson. Let's learn about cheating and corruption with the White Sox scandal. Like, let's learn about like racism, and like also mythology with regard to Ty Cobb and the question of how racist Ty Cobb was or wasn't. Things of this nature. Like, and like, let's get into like, is Tony Gwynn like overrated? Batting average versus whatever. It's all this. Anyway, it's like, once the thing is, like, people's wholesome interest and desire to participate in the world should be encouraged at every moment. And like, basically, so much of the reason why, I'm sorry, do people want to kill the people of your nation? It's like, well, you probably like killed their children, right? There's probably some sort of blood feud happening where, like, yeah, it would be really great if we could just sit around and learn about how the world works and like, count flowers and whatever. But we've been killing each other and we can't relax, right? And so like, everybody hates each other. And so you kind of have to allow for that. I mean, how could you expect it to be any different than that? Right? Given the state of war that has existed. But at the same time, like, if you are a thinking person or whatever, like, if you have the capacity, you can also see that the unregulated conflict among basically people who are all becoming what are called super empowered, right? Super powered, right? Technology is becoming so powerful that the people who are able to wield it, so there's the operators and the designers and creators of technology, manufacturers, and then there's the people who wield decisive influence over those people, and then like, there's intermediaries. That's basically what there is. And so it's like, ma freaking, like, you build a nanoswarm that can do whatever, and then who decides what the command is, right? And that's where there could be a mutiny, right? Like, there could be people who are closer to the technology who officially are not in charge, but the people who are officially in charge don't actually understand the technology. So like, the people who actually make the computer could actually, take control by doing something that they're not supposed to do. But that's why, you'd build in a bunch of protocols and safety mechanisms to make sure that doesn't fucking happen, because that's basically the most high stakes fucking, thing that there is. But anyway, the point is, like, in the future, there's not going to be this whole idea of like, oh, there's the state, there's the other people, there is whatever. No, we're all the state, right? We are all police officers. We are all soldiers. We are all FEMA. We are all emergency response. We're all doctors. We're all therapists. We're all educators. We're teachers. We're all dancers. We're all artists. We're all, like, we're all doing all these things. And because the thing is, like, back to implosion, it's not that we have to learn a bunch of different things. It's that what we're already doing is participating, in the sense, right, that Jesus Christ is the Lord of the dance. It's not that, it's like, back to all is vanity. It's like, all is vanity, all is dancing. But not because this is me literally dancing, but that It's all part of the dance, in the same way that it's all part of politics. It's all part of healthcare. It's all part of the medical. It's all part of life. It's all part of death, right? It's all part of whatever specialized, the carceral, right? We're all trapped. Aren't we all trapped? Aren't we all, we're all jailers, right? And we're all in jail. It's very similar to the idea of like, we are all Palestinian, or we are all Jewish, or we are all, je suis Charlie, right? Like, I am Charlie, whatever. I am Charlie Hebdo. I am Nat Turner, right? I'm John Brown. There's a lot of places you can go that are very edgy, right? Because we're doing this with the spirit of Christian universalism and compassion for all sentient beings, with the understanding that maybe one day we will be all sentient beings. And so it's a level of Nietzschean affirmation where, you have to accept a lot. But that's again back to, being more accepting, like more realistic, more cynical, frankly, than these kind of people. Giorgio Agamben, Carl Schmitt, to basically have the stance like, you're naive. Like, I'm not scared of you because it's like, oh my God, how could you be so cold-blooded? It's like, I'm 50 times more cold-blooded than you. Like, anyway, that's the vibe I think is appropriate. But the whole thing is to see the bleakness, right? You see the hopelessness and the emptiness, or like Michael Shannon in Revolutionary Road. But you don't want to hurt people, right? And you understand that doesn't actually make sense to do that, right? Like, that's the point. But it's not, like, one aspect of it is that it's not because, like, some people think that it's like you're supposed to be good out of the kindness of your own heart, but it's like not really that way. Like, it's fine for you to do that, but it's like, even for people who are nice because they're kind, like, you wind up getting in a situation where people abuse you, and then you have to learn how to like set limits on your kindness. And so either way, like, you're coming up to the limit. You're coming up to the way in which serving self and serving others are the same. Because for the person who is just like, oh, I'm going to do me, you wind up realizing, right, that you are not able to actually serve yourself. It's sort of like, you can't tickle yourself. Like, there's certain things that you could set a goal. Like, okay, right. So like, you have a will, right? You want things, but part of what you want could involve other people and their desire. So it's like so it's like the core thing, the girlfriend is like, I don't want you to come with me. I want you to want to come with me. And like, people make fun of that shit, but that is like fun and fucking mental. Like, I don't want you to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I want you to want to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, right? I don't want you to work for Waffle House. I want you to want to work for Waffle House. Like, why do you want to work for Waffle House? Why do you want to work for whatever, right? And you're supposed to say, wow, just like your shit in particular is so amazing, right? And that's why people are so cynical on the internet, and they're just like, meh, like, I'm just here for money, blah. And it's like, okay, great, but like, you gotta have a fucking strat. Like, you can be that cynical and be like, shit is stupid, but like, nothing's guaranteed. Like, you can just sit around and mope and whatever, but like, you can still just die in a nuclear war. So basically, my thing is like, you better have an idea for an influence operation. Like, you better be doing something. And like, what's great about art, that's where it bleeds into art, right? Art is an influence operation. Yeah, it's even like, because influence operation, it could be like nonviolence disobedience, it could be military, it could be art, right? It could be motivated by many different things. Why do you want to have influence? But like, this is another thing I pound the table about anyway. And that's, again, the state. But so the thing is, like, aside from the idea, there is no central marketplace of influence where like influence is decided. The idea of the state is a formal mechanism that is supposed to like ground influence and decision making, but like, it doesn't actually work. It's just that it allows for something to happen, not reproduction, not the same thing, but like, not the establishment of anything. But there is a process, or there's processual. There are systems of systems, continually evolving complex systems that are allowed to occur because there is the perception, right, of a state. There is the perception that, there is some sort of formalization of decision making, when in reality, it's not that way at all. Like, the people who officially make the decisions are not the people who really make the decisions. I'm not saying I really know who does make the decisions, but fundamentally, like, that's in question, right? Which cannot help but be a legitimacy crisis if you take seriously the idea that, like, I'm supposed to know what I'm signing up for. I just don't. And so that's why, to Baudrillard's point, politics, and therefore the state, right, is a second order simulation model, where it's like, I see the symptoms, but I see something which is obviously pretending to be something. And it's just giving off like very actually implausible cues. It's not very plausibly being a unitary actor whatsoever, right? It's just that like the problem is it's so core to like our religion, our attachment style, right? Literally, you have to think about how our mediations to each other, like our relationships to people that we love, are mediated by our what we think they think about the government or the state or whatever. Like that's so sick and twisted. Like because it's like we'll all sit around, we don't trust the government, but at the same time, like why do you think we are able to sit here and chat so enjoyably? Why do you think the electricity's on? Right? Why do you think I'm allowed to just drive around? Like why do you think like yeah, like we're already within. So that's why I see people talk about, oh, we need to challenge the state, blah blah blah. We need to break from empire. It's like no, there's no break in that sense. That's the bleak part. That's where it's like no, there is no, there's no being better than this. There is no being better than. Well, what do you say? Playing into people's narratives. That's what somebody says to me. And the thing is, like, cynically playing into people's narratives, like, that is an element of what people call fascism or something, because you don't have to believe in those sorts of stories in order to play on people's susceptibility to them. Where you want to be better than that, right? But that's also where you want to be better than the left. That's where you need to destroy the left-right opposition, because you obviously don't want to be a fascist or whatever. But you also don't really want to be a Marxist or whatever. You don't really want to just like fall in with whatever people think socialism is, but see, that's where you have to basically play. That's what we're all doing in terms of our narrative emergency response. You're playing with people's expectations because people want some sense of continuity, but we also want change. And so we are constantly curating and mixing together familiar and unfamiliar elements. And we're also thinking about our own quality of intention. And actually, the best results are going to happen when we're not like, you can try and change people for the better, but it's better not to have specific expectations, right? So, for example, like maybe somebody will become nicer, but you're not going to talk to them. It's important to be able to be okay with that and accept and basically like understand like when it's good to fidget with something and when you need to let things go. And not like let it go in your heart, like talk to your friends about it, right? Like maintain it in rotation. It's certainly part of your life. It's part of your life forever, like every experience. Like you don't have to let things go, right? And even dealing with our own emotions is not just our responsibility, but we do have to then, nurture those situations. And again, we're back to attachment style. But that's again where it's like, again, to Thomas Hobbes's thing, it's like, you can't rely on the state to do that for you. The sovereign is not going to step in and prevent, people within a country or whatever, given an in-group, right, from being against each other. This is anime betrayals, right? Top 10 anime betrayals. This is when your best friend sleeps with your partner. This is when the government does a coup. This is, when the call is coming from inside the fucking house, right? And that is something that you ultimately cannot adjudicate with law. Because in order to do the law, you have to follow the law. It ultimately is based on promises, right? It's based on promises and people actually taking promises seriously. We're back to David Hume. And so the state question is bottoming out. I'll just open that up and I'll just read you the paragraph from that. And that's just going to be the end because I am so past the time when I wanted to be done with this. So we're doing the Treatise of Human Nature. I'm reading the part that's about the transubstantiation. And then we're going to be dead. All right. Oh, this place is so long. You know what? We can do it. But I need more water. It has to be done. Okay. Let's just do this. Of the obligation of promises, section 5. That the rule of morality which enjoins the performance of promises is not natural will sufficiently appear from these two propositions, which I proceed to prove, vis-a-vis that a promise would not be intelligible before human conventions had established it, and even if it were intelligible, it would not be attended with any moral obligation. I say first that a promise is not intelligible naturally, nor antecedent to human conventions, and that a man unacquainted with society could never enter into any engagements with another, even though they could perceive each other's thoughts by intuition. I want to make this bigger. Sir. Oh. If promises be natural and intelligible, there must be some act of the mind attending these words, I promise. And on this act of the mind must the obligation depend. Let us therefore run over all the faculties of the soul and see which of them is exerted in our promises. The act of the mind expressed by a promise is not a resolution to perform anything, for that alone never imposes any obligation, nor is it a desire of such a performance. For we may bind ourselves without such a desire, or even with an aversion declared and avowed. Neither is it the willing of that action which we promise to perform. For a promise always regards some future time, and the will has an influence only on present actions. It follows, therefore, that since the act of the mind which enters into a promise and produces its obligation is neither the resolving, desiring, nor willing of any particular performance, it must necessarily be the willing of that obligation which arises from the promise. Nor is this only a conclusion of philosophy, but is entirely conformable to our common ways of thinking and of expressing ourselves when we say that we are bound by our own consent, and that the obligation arises from our mere will and pleasure. The only question then is whether there be not a manifest absurdity in supposing this act of the mind, and such an absurdity as no man could fall into, whose ideas are not confounded with prejudice and the fallacious use of language. All morality depends upon our sentiments, and when any action or quality of the mind pleases us after a certain manner, we say it is virtuous, and when the neglect or non-performance of it displeases us after a like manner, we say that we lie under an obligation to perform it. A change of the obligation supposes a change of the sentiment, and a creation of a new obligation supposes some new sentiment to arise. But it is certain we can naturally no more change our own sentiments than the motions of the heavens, nor by a single act of our will, that is, by a promise, render any action agreeable or disagreeable, moral or immoral, which, without that act, would have produced contrary impressions, or have been endowed with different qualities. It would be absurd, therefore, to will any new obligation, that is, any new sentiment of pain or pleasure, nor is it possible that men could naturally fall into so gross an absurdity. A promise, therefore, is naturally something altogether unintelligible, nor is there any act of mind belonging to it. Footnote. Were morality discoverable by reason and not by sentiment, it would still be more evident that promises could make no alteration upon it. Morality is supposed to consist in relation. Every new imposition of morality, therefore, must arise from some new relation of objects, and consequently the will could not produce immediately any change in morals, but could have that effect only by producing a change upon the objects. But as the moral obligation of a promise is the pure effect of the will, without the least change in any part of the universe, it follows that promises have no natural obligation. Should it be said that this act of the will, being in effect a new object, produces new relations and new duties, I would answer that this is a pure sophism which may be detected by a very moderate share of accuracy and exactness. To will a new obligation is to will a new relation of objects. And therefore, if this new relation of objects were formed by the volition itself, we should in effect will the volition, which is plainly absurd and impossible. The will has here no object to which it could tend, but must return upon itself in infinitum. The new obligation depends upon new relations. New relations depend upon a new volition. The new volition has for object a new obligation, and consequently new relations, and consequently a new volition, which volition again has in view a new obligation, relation, and volition. Without any termination, it is impossible. Therefore, we could ever will a new obligation, and consequently it is impossible the will could ever accompany a promise or produce a new obligation of morality. But secondly, if there was any act of the mind belonging to it, it could not naturally produce any obligation. This appears evidently from the foregoing reasoning. A promise creates a new obligation. A new obligation supposes new sentiments to arise. The will never creates new sentiments. There could not naturally, therefore, arise any obligation from a promise, even supposing it could fall into the absurdity of willing that obligation. The same truth may be proved still more evidently by that reasoning which proved justice in general to be an artificial virtue. No action can be required of us as our duty unless there be implanted in human nature some actuating passion or motive capable of producing the action. This motive cannot be the sense of duty. A sense of duty supposes an antecedent obligation, and where an action is not required by any natural passion, it cannot be required by any natural obligation, since it may be omitted without proving any defect or imperfection in the mind and temper, and consequently without any vice. Now, it is evident we have no motive leading us to the performance of promises distinct from a sense of duty. If we thought that promises had no moral obligation, we should never feel any inclination to observe them. This is not the case with the natural virtues. Though there was no obligation to relieve the miserable, our humanity would lead us to it. And when we omit that duty, the immorality of the omission arises from its being a proof that we want the natural sentiments of humanity. A father knows it to be his duty to take care of his children, but he has also a natural inclination to it. And if no human creature had that inclination, no one could lie under any such obligation. But as there is naturally no inclination to observe promises distinct from a sense of their obligation, it follows that fidelity is no natural virtue and that promises have no force antecedent to human conventions. If anyone dissent from this, he must give a regular proof of these two propositions, vis-a-vis, that there is a particular act of the mind annexed to promises, and that consequent to this act of the mind, there arises an inclination to perform distinct from a sense of duty. I presume that it is impossible to prove either of these 2 points, and therefore I venture to conclude that promises are human inventions founded on the necessities and interests of society. In order to discover these necessities and interests, we must consider the same qualities of human nature, which we have already found to give rise to the preceding laws of society. Men being naturally selfish, or endowed only with a confined generosity, they are not easily induced to perform any action for the interest of strangers, except with a view of some reciprocal advantage, which they had no hope of obtaining but by such a performance. Now, as it frequently happens that these mutual performances cannot be finished at the same instant, it is necessary that one party be contented to remain in uncertainty and depend upon the gratitude of the other for a return of kindness. But so much more corruption is there among men that, generally speaking, this becomes but a slender security, and as the benefactor is here supposed to bestow his favors with a view to self-interest, this both takes off from the obligation and sets an example to selfishness, which is the true mother of ingratitude. Were we, therefore, to follow the natural course of our passions and inclinations, we should perform but few actions for the advantage of others from disinterested views, because we are naturally very limited in our kindness and affection, and we should perform as few of that kind out of a regard to interest, because we cannot depend upon their gratitude. Here then is the mutual commerce of good offices in a manner lost among mankind, and everyone reduced to his own skill and industry for his well-being and subsistence. The invention of the law of nature concerning the stability of possession has already rendered men tolerable to each other. That of the transference of property and possession by consent has begun to render them mutually advantageous. But still these laws of nature, however strictly observed, are not sufficient to render them so serviceable to each other as by nature they are fitted to become. Though possession be stable, men may often reap but small advantage from it, while they are possessed of a greater quantity of any species of goods than they have occasion for, and at the same time suffer by the want of others. The transference of property, which is the proper remedy for this inconvenience, cannot remedy it entirely, because it can only take place with regard to such objects as are present and individual, but not to such as are absent or general. One cannot transfer the property of a particular house 20 leagues distant, because the consent cannot be attended with delivery, which is a requisite circumstance. Neither can one transfer the property of 10 bushels of corn or 5 hogsheads of wine by the mere expression and consent, because these are only general terms and have no direct relation to any particular heap of corn or barrels of wine. Besides, the commerce of mankind is not confined to the barter of commodities, but may extend to services and actions, which we may exchange to our mutual interest and advantage. Your corn is ripe today, mine will be so tomorrow. It is profitable for us both that I should labor for you today, and that you should aid me tomorrow. I have no kindness for you, and I know you have as little for me. I will not therefore take any pains on your account, and should I labor with you upon my own account in expectation of a return, I know I should be disappointed, and that I should in vain depend upon your gratitude. Here then I leave you to labor alone. You treat me in the same manner. The seasons change, and both of us lose our harvests, for want of mutual confidence and security. All this is the effect of the natural and inherent principles and passions of human nature, and as these passions and principles are inalterable, it may be thought that our conduct, which depends on them, must be so too, and it would be in vain, either for moralists or politicians, to tamper with us or attempt to change the usual course of our actions with a view to public interest. And indeed, did the success of their designs depend upon their success in correcting the selfishness and ingratitude of men, they would never make any progress unless aided by omnipotence, which is alone able to new mold the human mind and change its character in such fundamental articles. All they can pretend to is to give a new direction to these natural passions and teach us that we can better satisfy our appetites in an oblique and artificial manner than by their headlong and impetuous motion. Here I learned to do a service to another without bearing him any real kindness, because I foresee that he will return my service in expectation of another of the same kind, and in order to maintain the same correspondence of good offices with me or with others. And accordingly, after I have served him, and he is in possession of the advantage arising from my action, he is induced to perform his part as foreseeing the consequences of his refusal. But through this self-interested commerce of man begins to take place and to predominate in society. Though this self-interested commerce of man begins to take place and to predominate in society, it does not entirely abolish the more generous and noble intercourse of friendship and good offices. I may still do services to such persons as I love and am more particularly acquainted with without any prospect of advantage, and they may make me a return in the same manner without any view but that of recompensing my past services. In order, therefore, to distinguish those two sorts of commerce, the interested and the disinterested, there is a certain form of words invented for the former by which we bind ourselves to the performance of any action. This form of words constitutes what we call a promise, which is the sanction of the interested commerce of mankind. When a man says he promises anything, he in effect expresses a resolution of performing it, and along with that, by making use of this form of words, subjects himself to the penalty of never being trusted again in case of failure. A resolution is the natural act of the mind which promises express. But were there no more than a resolution in the case, promises would only declare our former motives and would not create any new motive or obligation. They are the conventions of men which create a new motive. When experience has taught us that human affairs could be conducted much more for mutual advantage, were there certain symbols or signs instituted by which we might give each other security of our conduct in any particular incident. After these signs are instituted, whoever uses them is immediately bound by his interest to execute his engagements and must never expect to be trusted by anyone anymore if he refused to perform what he promised. Nor is that knowledge, which is requisite to make mankind sensible of this interest in the institution and observance of promises, to be esteemed superior to the capacity of human nature, however savage and uncultivated. There needs but a very little at practice of the world to make us perceive all these consequences and advantages. The shortest experience of society discovers them to every mortal, and when each individual perceives the same sense of interest in all his fellows, he immediately performs his part of any contract, as being assured that they will not be wanting in theirs. All of them, by concert, enter into a scheme of actions calculated for common benefit and agree to be true to their word. Nor is there anything requisite to form this concert or convention, but that everyone have a sense of interest in the faithful fulfilling of engagements and express that sense to other members of the society. This immediately causes that interest to operate upon them, and interest is the first obligation to the performance of promises. Afterwards, a sentiment of morals concurs with interest and becomes a new obligation upon mankind. This sentiment of morality in the performance of promises arises from the same principles as that in the abstinence from the property of others. Public interest, education, and the artifices of politicians have the same effect in both cases. The difficulties that occur to us in supposing a moral obligation to attend promises we either surmount or elude. For instance, the expression of a resolution is not commonly supposed to be obligatory, and we cannot readily conceive how the making use of a certain form of words should be able to cause any material difference. Here, therefore, we feign a new act of the mind, which we call the willing and obligation, and on this we suppose the morality to depend. But we have proved already that there is no such act of the mind, and consequently the promises impose no natural obligation. To confirm this, we may subjoin some other reflections concerning that will which is supposed to enter into a promise and to cause its obligation. It is evident that the will alone is never supposed to cause any obligation, but must be expressed by words or signs in order to impose a tie upon any man. The expression, being once brought in as subservient to the will, soon becomes the principal part of the promise, nor will a man be less bound by his word, though he secretly give a different direction to his intention and withhold himself both from a resolution and from willing an obligation. But though the expression makes on most occasions the whole of the promise, yet it does not always so, and one who should make use of any expression of which he knows not the meaning, and which he uses without any intention of binding himself, would not certainly be bound by it. Nay, though he knows its meaning, yet if he uses it in jest only, and with such signs as show evidently he has no serious intention of binding himself, he would not lie under any obligation of performance, but it is necessary that the words be a perfect expression of the will, without any contrary signs. Nay, even this we must not carry so far as to imagine that one by whom by our quickness of understanding we conjecture from certain signs to have an intention of deceiving us is not bound by his expression or verbal promise if we accept it, but must limit this conclusion to those cases where the signs are of a different kind from those of deceit. All of these contradictions are easily accounted for if the obligation of promises be merely a human invention for the convenience of society, but will never be explained if it be something real and natural arising from any action of the mind or body. I shall further observe that since every new promise imposes a new obligation of morality on the person who promises, and since this new obligation arises from his will, it is one of the most mysterious and incomprehensible operations that can possibly be imagined, and may even be compared to transubstantiation or holy orders, where a certain form of words, along with a certain intention, changes entirely the nature of an external object and even of a human nature. But though these mysteries be so far alike, it is very remarkable that they differ widely in other particulars, and that this difference may be regarded as a strong proof of the difference of their origins. As the obligation of promises is an invention for the interest of society, it is warped into as many different forms as that interest requires, and even runs into direct contradictions rather than lose sight of its object. But as those other monstrous doctrines are mere priestly inventions and have no public interest in view, they are less disturbed in their progress by new obstacles, and it must be owned that, after the first absurdity, they follow more directly the current of reason and good sense. Theologians clearly perceived that the external form of words, being mere sound, require an intention to make them have any efficacy, and that this intention, being once considered as a requisite circumstance, its absence must equally prevent the effect, whether avowed or concealed, whether sincere or deceitful. Accordingly, they have commonly determined that the intention of the priest makes the sacrament, and that when he secretly withdraws his intention, he is highly criminal in himself, but still destroys the baptism or communion or holy orders. The terrible consequences of this doctrine were not able to hinder its taking place, as the inconvenience of a similar doctrine with regard to promises have prevented the doctrine from establishing itself. Men are always more concerned about the present life than the future, and are apt to think the smallest evil which regards the former more important than the greatest which regards the latter. About transubstantiation and holy orders, I mean so far as holy orders are supposed to produce the indelible character. In other respects, they are only a legal qualification. We may draw the same conclusion concerning the origin of promises from the force which is supposed to invalidate all contracts and free us from their obligation. Such a principle is a proof that promises have no natural obligation and are mere artificial contrivances for the convenience and advantage of society. If we consider a right of the matter, force is not essentially different from any other motive of hope or fear, which may induce us to engage our word and lay ourselves under any obligation. A man dangerously wounded who promises a competent sum to a surgeon to cure him would certainly be bound to performance, though the case be not so much different from that of one who promises a sum to a robber as to produce so great a difference in our sentiments of morality, if these sentiments were not built entirely on public interest and convenience.